Today we will be briefly covering the lymphatic system, which is a critical component of the immune system, as well as the respiratory system. While these seem like totally separate parts of the body, we will come to find out that they are actually very closely related, as our respiratory system is a main pathway of exposure to the outside, and the outside is where we find many disease-causing pathogens. As such, our immune system needs to function at a high level where we are most likely to encounter bacteria and airborne illnesses. So to begin our examination, we will first look at the respiratory system, see how we actually bring in fresh oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide, then look at an overview of the immune and lymphatic systems, and examine a few ways that these systems are interconnected. So first, let's examine our immune system. Step one is to see how oxygen actually gets into the body. So air will first move in through the mouth and nasal passages, and these nasal pathways contain 4 specialized structures known as the paranasal sinuses. And these sinuses function for warming and humidification of the inhaled air, and they are each named for their associated cranial bone, being the sphenoid, ethmoid, maxillary, and frontal paranasal sinuses. And these sinuses, as well as the nasal conchae and meatuses, are lined with specialized epithelial tissue that contain mucus-secreting goblet cells, and this mucus helps to trap any airborne bacteria that can then be swallowed and dissolved in the stomach acid, which effectively neutralizes those pathogens. Air will then move down through the pharynx, past the open epiglottis, past the larynx, down through the trachea into the splitting bronchi. And these bronchi then further split into bronchioles, and each terminal bronchiole meets with a respiratory bronchiole, which provides a channel towards an alveolar duct that ends with clusters of alveoli where a gas exchange can occur. Oxygen from the environment is diffused into the pulmonary capillaries surrounding each alveolus, which subsequently takes the blood to the heart through the pulmonary veins. Simultaneously, deoxygenated blood from the pulmonary arteries diffuses out their carbon dioxide, which can then be exhaled. These gases move due to partial pressures, with each gas moving from high concentration to low concentration environments across that respiratory membrane of the alveoli. Next, we have the immune system, which is how our bodies fight pathogens and diseases. This action is facilitated by the lymphatic system, which specifically refers to the channels through which lymph fluid flows. The lymphatic capillaries have flaps that allow interstitial fluid left over from the vascular system in the tissues to enter and transports it through lymphatic vessels, past lymphatic nodes, to the lymphatic trunks and ducts, then eventually draining through the subclavian veins back into systemic circulation as plasma. The lymph nodes are areas of concentrated lymph tissue and white blood cells, which screen the lymph fluid as it passes through and eliminates any pathogens within the fluid. That covers how the fluid moves. So let's quickly look at what types of cells are present in the fluid and that make up our immune response. Our big players are the lymphocytes. T lymphocytes, which recognize pathogen antigens and instruct the B lymphocytes on what types of antibodies to produce in order to fight that infection. Through a mother's milk, our passive immune response is trained on some basic infections and given general immunity. From birth, we also have some innate immunity, such as our mucus-producing sinuses previously mentioned, as well as our skin, which slows pathogens. The adaptive response takes time, typically around a week, before it can figure out how best to fight a given novel infection. And in these situations, our innate response slows the infection enough to give time to the adaptive response. There are a few other players in this game, such as the granular leukocytes, which contribute further to the inflammatory response and also do phagocytosis. There are also the agranular leukocytes, which are the T and B lymphocytes, as well as the monocytes, which become our phagocytic macrophages, patrolling the blood and tissues to eat bacteria. So how do these two systems work together? Primarily, the tonsils will be the main immune component of the respiratory system. These are 3 clumps of lymphatic tissue in the mouth and throat that kill off any bacteria entering through the nose or mouth, which can be identified as the lingual tonsil, situated behind the tongue, the palatine tonsil, situated on the hard palate, and the pharyngeal tonsil, situated within the pharynx. There are also macrophages present in the alveoli, which patrol the alveolar walls to track down any pathogens that escape these tonsils. Additionally, we can look to conditions such as asthma as another interaction of the two systems, where the immune system will overreact to things like dust or hard exercise, triggering granular eosinophils and agranular monocytes to induce inflammation within the lungs. This harms the ability of the lungs to properly contract and relax, causing bronchoconstriction and potentially cutting off the respiratory cycle and causing great distress to the patient. This requires an inhaled anti-inflammatory corticosteroid to treat. So that covers our examination of the respiratory and immune systems. We've seen how these two systems function independently to maintain homeostasis, with the respiratory system providing fresh oxygen and removing toxic carbon dioxide from the body, while the immune system fights infections to keep us healthy. We've also seen how these systems work together and learned that sometimes they can be against each other, such as with asthma. Overall, both these systems function to keep us alive and well, ensuring that infections do not take over our bodies and that we have adequate oxygen.